Are you really ready to send that camper home and do it well? Hello, Camp Mavericks, and welcome to the CampHacker podcast. My name is Travis Allison from Go Camp Pro. I'm a summer camp marketing and strategy consultant, and I help camps translate what they do so that more families insist on sending their children to summer camp.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Hudson. I'm the camp director of Camp Highlight, a sleepaway camp for kids who have queer parents, and that camp is often named the best camp in the world.
And my name's Joe Richards. I'm the executive director at Pierce Williams Summer Camp and Retreat Facility, which is a part of the United Church of Canada's camping network. And we're located in Fingal, Ontario, about halfway between Detroit and Toronto.
My name is Kate Taylor. I am the camp director at Camp YMCA Canawana, which is with the YMCAs of Quebec. The camp is located in Saint-Sauveur, but I am coming to you from beautiful, sunny Montreal.
Kate, we're so grateful to have you back on. Thanks for being here.
Always a pleasure.
Awesome. So today we want to talk about a pretty serious topic and think about it from lots of different angles. I really want to examine what camps need to do to be ready to send our camper home. So we know that there's different degrees or reasons why we might send a camper home. Some of it might be social reasons, some of it might be physical or health reasons, and there probably needs to be some contingency planning for all of those that are a little bit different. So there are some important things to consider. So I'm going to put aside for the fact that we're not going to examine all the different reasons why you would send a camper home. That is not this discussion. You pick, you decide for your campers. We're just going to talk about the ramifications of that and what we should be planning for and how we should thoughtfully deal with this in lots of different places. Because I think, A, we have to be ready to deal with emergencies before, during, and after. And we need to have a communications plan, a sort of community plan for all of those. And we need to have different ones, whether the kid is sent home for social reasons or because of a health emergency, et cetera. And so I think there's lots of different places to think about that. But Joe, when you're thinking about sending a camper home, you can pick the reason. What are some of the things going through your head at that time?
Some of the things going through my head at the time where we make that choice is, about pickup and speed of pickup and where they need to be before they get picked up, right? So Pierce Williams is a 5-day summer camp. Kids arrive on Sunday, kids leave on Friday. And most 90% of our kids, if not more, live within an hour's drive of Pierce Williams. So we're much more like a day camp from our population standpoint. And so it's often about why is a kid going home and do they need to be separated, right? Like, so do they need to be away from other kids? So is it a behavior management issue or, something where the safety of other kids or staff is? Because whenever a kid is separated like that, you always need to keep 2 staff with them from that moment of time on. You can never leave them alone with a single staff member. Years and years and years ago, this would be my first. In fact, it was my first summer here. I wasn't even summer 2005. We had a camper who he obviously needed to go home, and the staff had called me down to help facilitate that because it was late at night, and late night pickups are difficult. And I was there to witness him saying in front of 5 other staff members, which was a bit of a problem because that's not the way I would recommend you deal with it. You don't need 5 plus the executive director present to deal with this. But he said out loud, I'm going to accuse you of child abuse or of sexual abuse. And I said, great, you are going home. Like, there's no option for you now. And all of these people heard that. And you're going home because I will not stand for you trying to ruin the life of a 17-year-old person. And I think they were Children and Family Services, and those sometimes workers or guardians for kids in foster care can be the most loving people. Don't get me wrong, but some of them can be the most challenging, because I think we have called people up before when they're at a concert and they're like, well, we can't come tonight. And I was like, well, if you don't come, I call the worker, and they still get picked up, but then that leads to other issues. So I think it's this idea that when what I'm thinking about is the safety of staff and the safety of other campers, and the safety of the camper themselves, right? Because if there's not that issue, if it's a medical issue, often they're with the medic. But you're thinking about a whole bunch of things to make sure that that goes as smoothly as possible. And over the years, we've built in this idea that you should also think about, oh, did their parents order a t-shirt that we normally give out on Friday that also needs to go home with them tonight, right? Are there medications that need to come from the medic station to go home with this person, right? There's a whole list. It should actually be a checklist. That's a great idea. Not that it is a checklist, but there should be a checklist for us to use.
Well, and thank you for opening that up, because that was going to be my first thing is, where is the checklist? Somebody get the physical checklist off the clipboard and let's lay it on the table. And then I'm going to assign someone to be in charge of that checklist who, can work us through some things. So I appreciate you opening that door. How about for you, Kate? What are you thinking in a moment when you've made a decision, and regardless of, or you can deal with a specific of it, but what are you thinking?
Yeah, it's similar to Joe. It's a lot of logistic stuff. But the other thing that is always going on in my mind is like, who else at camp is going to be affected by this decision? Who is this camper's best friend? Who is their counselor? Who is the person that they've been going to interest groups with? Like, who are all the people that I'm going to get pushback from, or that I'm going to get questions from, and what am I going to be able to tell them? So, obviously, like, we make decisions really, really fast in our head of like, what are the things that I can say about the situation, and what are the things that I absolutely can't say about the situation? And a first-time director is not necessarily going to have those tools to think about like, oh, I can't say that. Like, you need to think about that in the moment as well, is like, what parts of this story need to stay just between me and this camper in this room that we've made this decision that the camper is going home, because sometimes it's super personal stuff, and there's a lot going on in between the relationship of the camper and how they've been at camp. So I'm sort of formulating the story of why this camper is no longer at camp, and who I'm going to tell what pieces of information to.
Thanks, Kate. How about you, Chris?
I have 1,000 things to say.
Okay.
I'm trying to condense it. Yes, number one, try and condense it into like a 2.5-minute screed. I have so many thoughts on this topic. I could probably write like a whole article about this, because I think it is really complicated to send a kid home for behavior reasons. Like Joe mentioned, like if it's a medical reason, I feel like everyone is supporting you in that decision. The staff, the camper themselves, the family. Like that's kind of a no-brainer. You call the family, they're gonna be like, oh my gosh, anything you need. When it's behavior, then it becomes multiple conversations. There's the interpretation of the staff that brought this to you. There's relaying that to the parent. Who's going to relay it? What gets relayed? How much facts do we want spread around to other campers? It becomes super complicated. I know we're not focusing on the reasons, like, because we could go. However, I do want to say, like, it's something to pay attention to. We pay attention to it at Camp Highlight when kids of difference, like non-white kids, neurotypical kids are identified as like, oh, this person needs to go home. We do double duty, and we do make sure that we're like, okay, like what's going on here? Like who's going to contact the parents? What is that conversation going to be? And we need to address that difference in this conversation to put the parents at ease. I just want to give a plug for that, because although we're like, oh, we have standards for everyone, this is a whole nother podcast. Not always. Okay, so putting that to the side, or perhaps for a future conversation, I think really when you send a kid home for behavior, oh my gosh, this is so tough. Contacting the parent, who is your customer, right? The child is the participant, the parent is the customer, and trying to explain to them that the thing that they purchased has to, the thing that they purchased for their child has to come home, but in most cases, they're not getting a refund, is a very difficult conversation to have, right? Because money is a motivator for a lot of people. Camps cost a lot of money. We cost a lot of money to do this childcare. and to call someone and be like, hey, something your kid did is going to send your kid home. You have to come pick them up and we're not giving you your money back. Then it's like, okay, well, then what did he do? The negotiation starts. And that is always the hardest part, because I think I'll speak for myself. I think my ego gets involved. Like, parent, are you challenging me on the way that I'm reading this situation? Are you challenging me on what I think can keep your child and other children safe? Like, I'm the expert here. Do not challenge me. And it's a lot to push through in that moment. I love Joe's idea of a checklist, because I think in the couple of times that we've had to send kids home for non-medical reasons, there is a franticness to the way that we're doing it. We have some general guidelines, like the child stays separated. Like we pick the kid up in a golf cart. The other campers never see that camper again. We take care of it. Someone packs their stuff. But like the little logistics, like you mentioned, the t-shirt, I can't tell you how many times we made that mistake. And then we had to mail the t-shirt home, which feels a little aggressive. I don't know. It seems a little aggressive. You send the kid home and then like 3 weeks later, oh, by the way, here's the t-shirt that we all used in the group picture, but you weren't there. Oh my gosh. I think it's really painful. And as far as the other campers are concerned, how you communicate to the other campers, it can really send a chill through the camp when someone goes home for behavior. Just like when you fire a staff member, it sends a chill through your staff. And I would love to hear from the rest of you. Like, how do you address that chill in the campers? This is supposed to be a fun experience for them. Yes, they know the rules, right? But to enact it that way, like to actually drop the hammer, makes it so real. So I'm going to throw that out to the rest of you. How do you address that chill that comes across the campers? Because, and I'm finishing up, I promise, we sent a camper home in 2013. And I just recently found out that legend, we've sent home kids since then, but that was the first kid that ever went home from Camp Highlight. That legend, that tale gets told to this day. It's still used at night to scare rookies, our youngest. And I'm just like, wow, the power of that, I don't know. I feel like I want to disconnect it.
It's interesting that you said the chill, honestly, because in a lot of the cases that I've had where we have been sending a kid home for behavior issues, there's honestly been a little bit of a sense of relief from the rest of camp that the camper is going home, because a lot of people were being impacted by this kid's behavior. That's why we're sending them home. And they're relieved to see that this camper will no longer be impacting them in that way. They're no longer having to worry about what this camper is going to do next, that is going to throw off their day or throw off their experience at camp. I definitely think that we've had more of the chill when a staff member gets sent home, because usually that was like a mistake that cost them their job. But with campers being sent home, it's usually escalated to the point where their behavior has been a toxic experience for the rest of camp.
Yeah, I'd agree. The chill on it depends on the way that camp is set up as well, right? The idea that when a camper is a challenging camper for behavior issues, we over the years have also tried to make sure that it's not the first time the parent's hearing from us about the kid, right? In circumstances where it's they've done something that immediately threatens campers or causes us to be like, you need to go now. It might be the first time, but we tend to try and at least have one conversation with the family. And remember, we only have them for 5 days. So this is a quick turnaround to say, on a Monday afternoon, I can call you after they've been there for less than 24 hours and say, hey, Chris seems to be struggling with some of these things at camp. And what are some of the ways that you might suggest to us to help Chris out? Because if this continues, our only option is going to be to not have Chris at camp. We also have I've certainly learned over the long term in speaking to parents over and over and over again, I'm never getting into the details, like the specific details on the phone. When the parent comes to pick them up, if they want to talk at that moment in time, I for sure will give them a few more details. But it's like, a parent sends you a complaint letter, or anybody sends you a complaint letter and it's got 52 points. And when you're young and feeling bold, you respond to all 52 points.
Despite the fact that it won't help.
And really what that person wants to hear is, I'm so sorry this happened to you. We'll try and do better. And so when we talk to parents, what I tend to say with some campers is, because trust me, camper parents with challenging campers know, like, this isn't the first time their child has been, that they've been called about their child from either a school or another program. And we don't know those things, but you have to know that this is not, it's not out of the ordinary. Right. But one of the things I often say to parents is, I say, great, well, Chris, we called you about Chris on Monday. It's now Wednesday, and Chris has had, he's had a really great week so far with some challenges. And I think his time at camp, so that he leaves with some positive memories, his time at camp is finished for this year. And next year we can try and get him to 4 days out of 5. And the year after we can try and get him to 5 days out of 5. But right now, for Chris's well-being, and our staff and whatnot, you need to come and pick Chris up. And many times, very few times do we have parents who push back at us. And it only becomes a real challenge for us when kids are from 2 or 3 hours away, but that doesn't happen as often. And we don't, as a reference. I don't know how many people, this is an interesting thought for all of us. How many kids do you actually send home? Like in the course of a summer, if I have, 500 campers, for behavior management reasons, would I send home 5 out of 500, like 1%? Even that, I don't think I hit that number. And
it feels high, doesn't it, to you?
Yeah.
Well, it feels so. Part of this is the other thing. And I thought about this as soon as Travis said, what's going through your mind? What's going through my mind immediately after a camper leaves is the other part of this. And this is also the same as when a staff member leaves, because a staff leaving is a whole other podcast, or asking staff to leave. The thought that goes through my head is, what did we fail to give this person to be successful in this environment? Right? Like, how can we prevent Chris from going home next year? Right? Like, is it something we did? Is it something? And with staff, it's easier to think through that, because you think through, what part of our training failed this person? Right? Like, what part of our training failed them to get ready and understand what our expectations were? And with campers, we leave our camper policy really vague, in the sense of, it's all about respect, right? Respecting the other people, respecting our facility, right? Because respect is easy enough for all parents and guardians to understand, and is easy enough to talk about. But yeah, 5 out of 500 sounds high to send home in a single summer.
Yeah, for sure.
We send home 1 kid every other year.
Yep.
It's about 1 kid every other year. And we get really dark about it. I'm like, well, this is the year. Who do you think it's going to be? Like, let's take that. I mean, it's so sick. Can I just push back on you for a second, Joe? Like, when we get rid of staff, which is a great idea for a topic. When we get rid of staff, I think I ask myself, how did we fail in the training? But when kids are sent home, and this is just my experience over the years that I've sent home kids as a director, I've seen kids go home as a counselor. Usually, it's not a surprise from the get. It's not a surprise from registration. And where I land now is like, why did we market to this family that we could handle this set of issues? And that is something that I'm going through with my team right now, because we are finishing up registration. Like, we talk a big game. We want camp to be open to everyone. But at the end of the day, there's some things that we cannot handle. And every time that we have tried to extend ourselves, every time we have tried to be like, no, we're going to rally, we failed. And then subsequently, we failed the family, and we gave the child the memory of a failure. And it was really because we thought we could do more than we could. So it's usually not like, oh, what could we have done more for the child? It's more like, I'm always left with, why did we think we could do more when I know all the assets that we have available?
Yeah. I think that I'll accept that pushback, in the sense of, I like your question. Why did we market to this family? Right? Like, what about us? But also this idea that, especially coming out of this pandemic, what we are doing at Pierce Williams, and I'm not suggesting that everybody has to do this, but we are doing is we're pulling everything back in to do what we do best. So I'm not extending ourselves to do vacation Bible schools or vacation Bible camps. I'm not extending myself to do other programming. I'm saying what we do best is summer camp on site at Pierce Williams, right? That's what we do best. And that's where I'm going to have most control of my staff. That's where I'm going to be able to control the interactions with campers and parents. And I think when a kid, so one of the things we've been really cautious about this year is that we're not having people register for camp. We're having people apply to camp.
Smart.
And
Smart.
This is,
we started doing that as well.
This is, the phrasing is important because, so in Canada, the Human Rights Code would imply that if you have varying abilities and you register for camp, that I have already implied that you're being accepted to camp. Versus if you're applying to camp, I can go through your sets of your various needs and determine whether we can help you out or we can help you or not. And it's a small thing, but I think it's important.
One of the things that comes up for me from what you were saying, and Kate, I want to get your response or thoughts on this, is that I wanted to make sure we touched on today. Like, there are always lessons from these things that we can apply. So we've changed a lot of policies at camp because of having to send kids home. A, because we accepted kids that we were not capable of caring for, and so we had to set some clear policies. B, we had to set some policies that were super clear. As I've talked about on this show before, and they've talked about on Camp Code a lot, we have a staff training session called How to Get Fired. That everything is just plain and black and white. We had to learn to do that with parents too, that we these are reasons that we will send your kid home. And here's how we'll handle it, so that at some point we can say, well, as you know, for the policy thing that you signed, this is our response. You already knew this because you signed this. Of course, they won't remember that. It's traumatic experience for parents. It's embarrassing. It's et cetera. But Kate, I wonder how you change and develop things, and what are the things that you've put in place because of experiences that you've had?
Yeah, I mean, when I started out at Canawana, we had a zero tolerance policy in our behavior manual, in our camper guide, whatever. But in practice, that wasn't what was happening. It wasn't what had been happening, and it wasn't what I was going to go forward doing. So I took out that language right away, because we don't have a zero tolerance policy. We have a case-by-case basis figuring stuff out policy. Everything is about what are all of the steps that we're going to try, that we're willing to try to keep this camper at camp before we get to the point of sending them home. Have we figured out some teachable moments for this kid? Have we figured out some restorative justice possibilities for this kid? Have we figured out some behavior charts that we can progress them towards behaviors that are more conducive to staying at camp? So it really wasn't a zero tolerance policy. It was a let's figure out how we're going to teach this kid better ways and give them a better success rate. So, and then in terms of the reactions to kids being sent home, I wouldn't say that we necessarily adjusted our policy, but everything adjusts our thinking, and everything then colors the next thought process that we're going to go through of okay, well, this is what happened with this camper. We're seeing similar behaviors in this camper. We're going to try the things we didn't try with that camper or whatnot.
Thanks, Kate. Go ahead, Chris.
All that. Also, I think the what I've learned,
all of it,
everything that everyone said, just pretend like I said it. Also, I'm going to lean on the logistics thing. Every time we send a kid home, our logistics get a little bit better. And we almost sent a kid home last year and then didn't, because the parent pushed back on us in a very respectful and very structured way. And we changed our mind And that really set off a whole chain of events where it's like, you know what, we love that the kid was able to stay, but when we make this decision, it has to be like absolutely airtight from now on. So like, it's just logistics. Like, how do we make this decision? How many people on staff sign up on the decision before we call? When we call, what are we saying? Et cetera, et cetera. We've learned a lot from that. And also, like I've said before, and Joe, we do the same thing. Like when people sign up for Camp Highlight, like they are not enrolled yet. They get an email when we enroll them, but that's after, if they're new, we review their stuff, we give them a call, we find out who their kid is, and then we hit the button. It's safer for everyone.
And I think that you said something I don't want us to miss, which is that when a decision is made, it has to be the decision. It's not a negotiation when I call a parent or a guardian. At that moment, they need to know that when we call them, the decision, and that's what I often start with, right? Just so you know, we're going to ask Chris to go home. And this is, you know, we can talk about why, but there's no chance that Chris can stay right now. It's just not in the best interest of Chris or of the camp.
I want to spend the last 5 minutes on this topic on some logistical things. We've kind of talked about, I mean, we've touched on them. I'm not saying we haven't, but a few things. I think sending a kid home really can be classified into two, like there's two situations or two kinds of things that this is the response. And of course, there's two kinds of people in the world is a joke. But anyway, to me, we deal with this between the camp and the family is one kind of situation. And that's behavioral, that's health, that's et cetera. We deal with this, we will be forced to deal with this between camp, the family, and the public. So is something happen that's newsworthy? And when I started camp directing, we would say, can you picture this as a newspaper headline? That's a metaphor that doesn't work as well these days, but picture it as being a tweet. So there is a separate kind of response that we all camps need to prepare for. I went through something probably in the late 90s that came out from the Ontario Camps Association. It was a workbook for crisis management planning. And it was incredibly intentionally done, and gave us such a great plan that we knew if there's ever some time that we had to call in outside, when it went beyond our relationship between the camp and the family, that we had to call in an outside agency, whether that was emergency response, et cetera, that at any point that could then become a news story. And so we had a plan for that. And we had a real, incredibly deep plan, who was going to talk to the media, how we were going to control for the media arriving at camp. All of those things went into the plan. That's the binder. That's the checklist. It's all in there. It's deep in there. But you have something that you can pull off. And we ended up having, a specific place where we could have these discussions away from the center of camp to make our plans. And I think all those things are critical. We don't have time to go into the details, but I think it's critical to have those kinds of plans ready to go, because it is a lot. It is a lot going on, and if you can just go through step by step by step, as many of you know, certainly who watch us on YouTube, I am obsessed with space and NASA, and that is one of the things that I respect, is how well everything's are plotted out, checklisted, etc. It's not just NASA, obviously, it's surgeons, it's pilots, etc. But having all that ready to go so that you don't have to think of every detail in an emergency when you're probably not at your best. When it comes to this point, every camp director I know is already exhausted from dealing with this situation for days, likely, or just sort of emotionally exhausted by the thing. So I think that that's important to say, have a plan, a communications plan, prepped, a whatever. I think that you should know when it's such a case that you need to send a car for parents and not trust the parents to drive up by themselves. When you need to have a staff member or an alumni show up at that parent's door and bring them to camp. All of that stuff can be planned and prepared for. So I wanted to make sure we at least touched on that. Any final thoughts, Chris, on things that we should be thinking about or considering that others may not have thought of?
Now you've given me something to think about. I was ready to go until you said that last bit. I was just thinking about parents who, through a confluence of events, they can't get their kid to camp, so they like either carpool or something. Like if that kid needs to go home, it introduces like a wild complication. And we don't necessarily want to make like individual how do you go home plans for every child, because like there'd be no time to run a camp. Anyway, okay, I'll think about that on my own time. But to answer your question, I think my advice to people, like I started to say earlier, really understand why you're sending kids home and make sure that there is a rubric checklist for that behavior and it's not left open to interpretation. Because when it's left open to interpretation, there are definitely certain kids who are going to be singled out for a variety of reasons. And then I'm just gonna steal Joe's before he says it, but like that logistical checklist of what to do is entirely my idea now. And I think you should definitely look into that. Nobody wants to think about these things. Sorry, I'm not going to talk for anybody else. I don't like to think about this when I'm planning camp. So we don't. And I see now that is a huge hole in the directorship and administration of the camp. Like, I don't want to look at it, so I don't want to imagine it, so I just don't plan for it. And that is absolutely the wrong choice, because whenever it does happen, the panic that I feel is just, I'd rather not. So those things.
How about for you, Kate?
Well, something that I just popped into my head when we were talking about the checklist, something to make sure you put on that checklist. Does this camper have a family member at camp?
Yes.
Do they have a sibling that their parent is now going to want to bring both kids home at once? If you're kicking one kid out of camp, are they going to want to take the other sibling out and the sibling's done nothing?
Or a sibling on staff.
Sibling on staff, they're probably a little bit more in the know about what's going on, and they're going to make their own decision for themselves. But yeah, if there's another camper that is being affected by this going home, and that's happened to me a couple of times. The last thought that I wanted to share was talking about the relationship that this camper now has with camp. And how are you going to work to repair that relationship if, and I hope that you would want this camper to come back in future sessions or in future years. What are you going to do after they are home to follow up with them on that and ask them about like their experience, debrief it with them when their emotions have cooled down a little bit, and talk to them about like what are the steps going forward to be able to like welcome you back for the next year.
Thanks, Kate. Joe?
I think that Chris said something that was very astute. Way to go, Chris. That we
was it when he was praising you for your smart ideas? Is that what
yes,
actually the way I remember it is that I stole his smart idea.
Oh yes, Chris's smart idea.
Owned it. You mean my smart idea, Travis? No, but Joe, please, you were complimenting me. Go ahead.
The astuteness is that we don't like to think, right? We don't like to think.
Yeah.
And so the more we can make, the more we can, this goes to the whole science and research on decision fatigue. And in that moment in time, we don't want to make a bunch of decisions. We want to, and this is easy for me because I am on the Enneagram, I'm a type 1. On numerous things, I'm a black and white seer. I see things in black and white. Gray is not a thing. I hire people who see gray so that they can be more touchy-feely with people, but the reality is the idea of black and white, you don't need to think as much. It's either right or it's wrong. It's either go home or it's either stay. It's all of those things. And I think that the checklist and thinking about when this will happen, right? Back to Dr. G's thing, not if this will happen, but when this happens, this is what we do. And I think that checklist, right, there's a whole bunch of stuff in our staff manuals, about weird things our staff ask us. They're like, do we really need a death and dismemberment policy? And I said, well, when it happens, I want to have it, right? They're like, when it happens, I'm like, well, yeah, I'm not expecting it to happen this year, but when something happens, I want to know what I'm supposed to do. And this policy clearly outlines the next steps for this really horrible thing that will happen at some point. And so I think that with campers going home, we know it's a when. We know that there's a process we can follow, and we know that we can make it, because that process will be a before, a during, and as Kate said, an after, right? Like, what do we do after? Because I've had campers go home early in my time here where We then sign birthday cards on Thursday nights. All of our staff sign, and they're like, well, they didn't stay the week, so they don't get a birthday card. And I was like, no, that is not the way you're playing this game. Everybody gets a birthday card except for people who didn't show up to camp, right? Like that's the rule I'll go by. So I think that we don't like to think. So the more we think about it now and just make sure that it's a checklist we can go through, the better.
And I will say, with every sensitivity, that we need to, if we can't do it, we need to have discussions with people who can think about all of the potential bad things, so that we at least have a checklist. Like, we need to prepare for this. This, I'm sure, if you don't have this communications list or this emergency crisis plan, now it feels overwhelming. But like everything at camp, you start small, you edit every year, you add every year. It gets better every time. We didn't have a plan in place if outside of the camp season, one of our staff members took their own life. And so we then had to prepare for that. And that made us realize that we had to prepare for that happening at camp. One of our friends' camps had a camper attacked by a bear on a trip. And we're like, okay, now we have to prepare for that. We had a camper who had to be helivaced from 5 or 6 hours away from medical care. And it took 12 hours for the helicopter to get there. So we didn't have a plan for that. Now we had a plan for that. And so listen at conferences, have the hard discussions, bring in people who can help you think about these things, and what you need to prepare for. If you don't do tripping, you don't need to prepare for what happens, for emergency medical evacuation. But there are things that are uncomfortable, etc. And I would encourage everybody to be thoughtful about those. Which is a very downer place to leave this discussion. And apologies, listeners. My overwhelming sense,
unicorns or magic or something. Don't you guys love breakfast cereal? I love it.
I can talk about scroll saws. We can get all over scroll saws.
Sorry, I butted in. Travis, please continue.
I'm so grateful to have the three of you share your experiences and to have this discussion with you. So thank you. I want to take a moment just now and thank our sponsor for this episode, Ultra Camp. For CampHacker listeners, they have made available to you the 10 best marketing tools and tips that they could gather. And you can get that for free by visiting ultracampmanagement.com/CampHacker and download their marketing toolbox. When you're a person who is so committed to making camp go well and putting campers and stuff first and all of those things, you can feel like you get trapped in the office when you have no time left for camp yourself. And the folks at Ultra Camp know that you didn't get into camp just to be a paperwork person or just to be a logistics person. So they created software to help camp professionals like yourself handle the camp registration and all of the administration around that quickly and efficiently. UltraCamp has powerful tools that put you in control of the information that you need when you need it. You can automate your billing. You can create custom reports. You can manage your hiring process, including a built-in background check. You can communicate with your customers and your donors, and you can add the efficiency of communication automation that gives you a platform that works for you. UltraCamp's goal is to provide resources so that their clients can spend more time in camp doing what they do best. And if this doesn't sound like a registration software, don't you think it should? Visit their website at ultracampmanagement.com/camphacker and set up a time to chat. They look forward to meeting you. That means it is time for us to switch modes and go to our tool of the week. I'm going to start us off this time. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see that I am holding up Dr. G's new book, From Stress to Resilient. It just came out this week. I hope that everybody brings it out for themselves. I think it'll help you plan staff training. One of the things that I love about this is that it's a workbook. It is not just a sit back and read book. It is lots of questions and things that you can work on to prepare yourself for resilience this summer, that you can use to inspire you to hire Dr. G to come and work on resilience with your staff, whatever. This is a great book, and you can find the link to it at camphacker.com, camphacker.tv/podcasts. If you go to camphacker.com, you'll get there, but camphacker.tv/podcast to find our show notes from this episode. Kate Taylor, what's your tool of the week?
My tool of the week is a hack for fresh avocado that I saw on TikTok. Shout out to my best friend for sending me that TikTok. So the hack is that in order to keep your avocados for longer, like if you're one of those people who wants to like buy a big bag of avocados because they're on sale and you want to make sure you can use them all and you're not stuck eating guacamole for 3 days straight, what you do is you put them in a tub or a glass container or whatever you got and fill the container with water so that the avocados are completely immersed in the water so that there's no oxygen coming into their little skins, and that keeps the avocados fresher for longer. I am in the process of testing this hack as we speak, so I can give you an update next time I'm on about whether it worked.
That's excellent. And dear listeners, if someone wants, you could buy the domain avocadohacker.tv and send it to Kate. I'm sure she would appreciate that. Then she could write her reports up there. Thanks, Kate. Chris?
Hi, I've recommended a couple of books on this podcast, but if you're watching, I'm recommending this one, Inclusive Conversations by Mary Frances Winter. There's a lot of books. There's a lot of books about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And hopefully, as a camp professional, you have read some of them, White Fragility, How to Be Anti-Racist. So you want to talk about race. I've read all three of those. Except for White Fragility because I'm okay. But what I want to say about this book, which has been super useful, is that, first of all, it's extremely well written and it lays out the case for why DEI is important, why it's important to talk about these topics at work. And there is a point where the author talks about especially why it's important to talk about it with children. And I have to say, I consumed this book in maybe 2 hours. It is the easiest read. And I know a lot of people find these topics challenging. However, this lays it out in such a way that it's like a perfect roadmap if you want to make your camp better. If you want to have more inclusive conversations with staff and families, it's a great place to start. And I will state publicly, I would recommend this over So You Want to Talk About Race, which I think I've recommended before. And I would recommend this over Kendi's book, How to Be Anti-Racist. This is a much easier place to start. The concepts are way easier to grasp. So check it out, Inclusive Conversations.
Thank you, Chris. Joe?
My tool of the week is creativemarket.com. So if you like design stuff or like fonts or like anything like that, my recommendation is to sign up for their weekly email because they give out 6 free things, downloads every week that you can use for various things in your graphic design world. It's something I've been doing for years and just never thought about as a tool, but it has increased my font collection dramatically. And it is just an amazing place to see what other people are doing. And I was just thinking through how to make camp stuff more like Gab would make camp stuff. And I just came across something I own, which is a camping infograph, right? So it's just it's in a package I bought years ago. I was like, oh, and it would be instead of a packing list, it's literally a picture of how to pack with the packing stuff. I was like, sweet. Let's use that this year and go from there. But yeah, Creative Market is a great place to find stuff like that.
That is excellent. Thank you very much. So if you want to get in touch with our guests and have any questions or follow-up, you can find their information in the show notes at camphacker.tv/podcast. And Kate, thank you so much for being on. I'm so grateful you're here.
Thanks for having me.
All right. I want to head us out by saying that I think that there's another Go Camp Pro podcast that you should check out. Joe and I run another show with our friend Heather called Fundraising at Camp. And if you're in a position that you are currently working at a nonprofit camp or thinking about running a nonprofit camp, fundraising is an essential skill. And I get to sit back and have Joe and Heather teach me every time we run the show, and it's been great to learn so much from them. We are just heading to the end of our second season of that, and there's some really great stuff, and I appreciate Heather and Joe for breaking it down and teaching us from the very basics of things. So you can search in your podcast app for fundraising at camp. And we hope you'll see you there. And thank you, everybody, for watching. Appreciate you who watch us on YouTube, subscribe. We've been getting a lot more subscriptions and comments on YouTube lately, and we're super grateful for those. And we're thankful for people that share the show. An episode like this that they like, they share it with a friend as well. Thanks for the evening, friends.